The Nigerian Economic Summit Group, in its role as connector, dialogue partner, watchdog, and intervener,
when you first start business, your target is to make your first million.
Seeks to change the narrative and trajectory of the Nigerian economy. Together with our partners, we're not just solving problems, but preventing them, because when advocacy succeeds, the nation transforms for the better. But advocacy is for the strong. It takes fact-based inputs, resilience, partnerships, courage, and a lot of heroes. So be our hero. Subscribe to our channel, listen to our messages, and engage with us. Together, we can transform Nigerian lives, communities, and businesses. Welcome to the NESG Radio.
And I'm your moderator for this plenary session. Welcome. Our job has basically been cut out for us on this panel, as our session is about building a secure Nigeria, key priorities for economic growth and inclusion. As part of the thrust of our conversation on this panel, the Human Development Report, which dimensions security in all aspects of life, will be on the front burner. Economic, health, environment, personal, community, political, and food security. I'd like to welcome all of them collectively, and then we're going to start by asking every panelist to make their 2 minutes welcome intervention. I'd like to start with the Governor of Kebbi State. 2 minutes intervention on the general thoughts that brings us to the urgency of now. Securing our future, the fierce urgency of now. How do you view where we are coming from, where we need to go, and what we need to do?
The first summit in 2015, when President Buhari took office, attempted to price the economic agenda of the All Progressive Congress. The promises that were made there, and I thought it was a very eye-opening event in the sense that it drew attention to the quantum of resources that we needed. It draws attention to the urgency of mobilizing those resources in order to tackle the challenges that were known then. That was not even when we are not, at a time when we are not anticipating the COVID phenomena. We are just talking about recovery from Boko Haram and also other security challenges in the South and emerging security situation as they were on the Northeast. But now, maybe the quantum of resources we need is even higher. And the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia appeared at a policy session a few years ago with Mr. President, and I was privileged to be in attendance. And he also spoke about two things that he repeated today: commitment to growth, and then inclusiveness. And I think those are urgent. He spoke about pastoralists. In the last 5 years, part of the challenges of underinvestment is the anger from the pastoral population. Maybe even the Boko Haram phenomena would not have happened as aggressively as it did if Lake Chad was there to support all the economic livelihood. And now, in spite of all the great work that has been done by President Buhari, in spite of getting the National Economic Council to really be a body of dialogue between the federal and subnational, and in fact, in spite of all the work done by the Federal Ministry of Finance, the minister is here, thanks to her, and Central Bank, we require much more resources to tackle some of our challenges. And I think for me, that is where the crunch is, because on the one hand, the Minister of Finance is being beaten up daily that we are overborrowed. And then on the other hand, we need more to deal with the challenges. And this debate about what the quantum that we require, about what to borrow or how much to borrow, has happened before. In the 80s, when Nigeria had less than $7 billion in borrowing, the Brazil, Argentina told the international capital market and the international community, we need more. We need the quantum of challenges we need to support the urgent and invest in our capacity is much more than is available to us. And I think we are still holding that debate today. And maybe Ayo Salami can help in passioning out how the minister can go out there and tell the world that it's urgent for me, and the most urgent thing is for the Minister of Finance or for the Nigerian economy to mobilize much more resources than we have done. All that it can. The minister with the World Bank encouraged states and federal government to enter into a fiscal responsibility framework. And the successes of that is that most states and the federal government has met all the criteria. So if we can do that, that means we can mobilize more resources. Because for me, at the subnational level, the limiting factor is resource. The OECD average to run a good primary education system is $12,000 per person. South Africa is at $2,000. No Nigerian state is at $300 per person. And like I said, maybe if Mala Nasiru has been here, it will have been more personal for him, because when he attempted to borrow $360 million from the World Bank, which is a small quantum of what Kaduna requires, it was very frustrating for him, both politically and he has to go through the federal government, he has to go through the National Assembly. It took a long time. Maybe it has limited the amount of development that will have been witnessed.
So, Dr. Salami, please pick it up from where His Excellency has spoken. There will still be opportunities for you to speak. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. And I think His Excellency has spoken well. In my view, there are probably 3 or 4 things about which we need renewed thinking and increasing clarity. The first, and which His Excellency has mentioned, is the whole issue around resources. We need to understand that the biggest pot of resources anywhere in the world resides in the private sector. And to that extent, one of the fundamental things that needs to happen is that as a nation, we need to begin to understand the dynamics of the private sector, trust the private sector, encourage the private sector, so that the resources that they bring to the table becomes available in, look, when I was a PhD student, and that was before my hair went white, private sector companies did not build infrastructure. Today, 30 years later, there are instruments that incentivize the private sector to bring money to the table for infrastructure. In other words, the first thing for me is that we need to have a clear appreciation. What can the government do? What should the government do? What should the private sector do? I think for too long, we have lived on this notion of Nigeria as a very wealthy country, that the government can pretty much provide everything. It cannot, it will not, and we therefore need to begin to think carefully about what the government should do at the federal level, at the state level, at local government level. That's the first thing. It's also very important, as we talk about the urgency of now, to understand the dynamics that are going to drive Nigeria. Internally, the dynamics of our population will be critical. The remarks this morning have already drawn our attention to the fact that by 2050, we are looking at double the number of Nigerians that currently are around. 400 million plus is what we are told. The ages are going to be sub 20 for an overwhelming piece of the majority. And so the question then becomes, it's not just about jobs, but it's also about, as His Excellency has said, how do we provide education? How do we provide health care? How do we give them a sense of belonging in a Nigeria to which they must feel committed? So for me, the dynamics of our population becomes the second thing, beyond having to think through what should be the role of the government. The third thing is that Nigeria must, in my view, understand her role in Africa and live to that role. One of the points that's been made very eloquently this morning is the role and the impact of the Africa CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement. His Excellency, Mr. Vice President, drew our attention to that. It's going to be very important. There are opportunities out there. You know, some of us, as we have grown older and begun to look backwards, remember Nigeria in the 1970s and the role she played in Africa's independence. Today, I am sitting down looking at a global pandemic, and Nigeria is not one of those countries that is, for example, providing inputs into the COVAX facility for vaccines. I see no reason why today, Nigeria, if our healthcare system, if our industrial system had developed, we should. These are the areas where Nigeria's role in Africa would be important. Nigeria's economy would be important. His Excellency, our keynote speaker, had said, secure Nigeria, you secure Africa. And I don't think that could be any truer. And I think the final point that I would like to make in all of this is that Nigeria must come very urgently to that position where we become a contributor to innovation. We are currently a domesticator of innovation. But important as that is, it is actually the implementation of what we set out to do that I think is at the heart of our, at least should be at the heart of our progress. As again, we listen to His Excellency, our keynote speaker, say, their own experience of industrial parks, shall we say, germinated from their experience of Nigeria's industrial parks. And the key question is, how far have we gone? It's not that we don't have ideas. We've alluded to the National Development Plan, the Perspective Plan. The key question that we have got to immediately find resolution to is, how do we get Nigeria implementing well, and as he said sometimes, clapping with both?
I'd like to go quickly to Professor Orama, if he is with us and we can see him, to make his 2 minutes intervention, which would be his opening comment at this very, very important opening plenary, the urgency of now.
The urgency of now has always been something we talk about. A lot of Africans talk about it. We need to do something about our continent. But it's always been rhetoric, lip service. We always talked about being a continent that has about 18% of global population, but accounts for 3% of total trade, accounts for less than 3% of GDP. The same thing for manufacturing value added. In every aspect of development, we remained at the lowest rungs of the ladder. And we talked about it and laughed at ourselves. But I think the COVID-19 was a game changer. Soon it became obvious to us that those of us who thought we could jump into an aircraft and go and get medical checks or get treated couldn't do that because everywhere was locked down. It became obvious to us that just to get simple face masks was difficult because countries immediately imposed export bans and everybody relied on the capacities to produce, and Africa couldn't produce. It became obvious to us that the global supply chains were not in any way linked to Africa. So what that meant was that we could not even produce or buy the simple things we wanted to buy. All of a sudden, we became a beggarly set of people on the continent. And I can attest to that because we were part of the team that were working to make sure that we got PPEs, therapeutics, test kits on the continent. And I knew we had to go and beg China. I knew we had to appeal President Ramaphosa to plead with President Xi to give us what we called Africa quota. And that was why we built the Africa Medical Supply Platform, to make sure we pulled all the demand to be able to access those. We didn't have to do that. We have all the facilities. We have all it takes, but we never ever pay attention to ourselves. I don't think that given all the things that have happened, that we should let this to continue. The good thing is that our leaders have made a very strong move by signing and quickly ratifying the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That will be the platform to begin to transform the continent. It should not be lip service again. But the colonial strategy we had fragmented Africa into 55 atomistic countries. We can never get our voices to speak the same language. We're always in a cacophony of voices. But we don't have to all agree. I think we need a few countries to move. And those few countries are maybe the bigger countries that have a lot at stake. Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco perhaps. And even the smaller economies that have shown the way in some ways, like Rwanda, like Ghana, for example. But these few countries can pull the others to move, and that's the way Africa had moved when it ever wanted to move. So the urgency of now, I don't think we need to preach it anymore. If we do nothing after all these experiences we've seen, and the fact that climate change will bring more pandemics, it means then that we do not, in fact, love ourselves.
Mrs. Wuneli, you have the floor to deliver your 2-minute opening comment.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor and privilege to be on such a distinguished panel. So I have 3 main points I want to underscore. The first is the pivotal role of the food and agriculture sector in Nigeria. Before COVID, 57% of household income in Nigeria was spent on food, the highest in the world. Post-COVID, this rate is even more alarming. When people spend majority of their income on food, they can't spend money on education, health, recreation, or anything else. 84% of Nigerians cannot afford a healthy diet. This is a direct link to the burgeoning cost of our healthcare system and the fact that we lose so many Nigerians. Our life expectancy is at 57, and I'm sure post-COVID it's even declining. Food is medicine. Food is critical for education. Children can't focus in schools if they're hungry. Under 5, it affects their brain development. And yet, we continue to pay lip service to our agriculture and food sector. And it's critical because Nigeria is naturally endowed for agricultural excellence. This is one area God gave us water, land, everything we need to succeed, and yet we're failing. And what is keeping us back? Number 1 is a commitment to an ecosystem solution to agriculture. Agriculture is not just the purview of the Ministry of Agriculture. We need infrastructure, we need energy, we need ICT, we need financing, we need every single ministry working together because this sector can create jobs, it can employ numerous young people, and it can empower our country and enable us to actually have significant export revenue, not just in terms of commodities, but processed food. And so I think it's high time we start taking this sector seriously and stop looking at it as agriculture, but food. Because food is growth. Food is currency. food is medicine and food is critical. That's number one. Number two is youth unemployment. And the minister talked about what he's done the former prime minister talked about what he's done in Ethiopia. All of us see the writing on the wall. Our young people are our biggest assets, and yet we treat them as a liability. Over the last 19 years, through my work with Leap Africa, I've seen what young people can contribute to Nigeria. They drive innovation, creativity, they have energy, they're willing to take risks, and yet we continue to underinvest in them. So what are we doing about our educational system? The ministries of education at the state level obviously have a critical role to play, and some of our states are really leading innovative efforts, so I commend them. But across the board, we continue to see high rates of youth unemployment. The rates of young people who go from primary to secondary and secondary to university is dismal. Only 30% of our children go on to secondary school, 5% go on to tertiary education. What happens to the rest of them? Unskilled, underskilled, and then a bedrock of a pot for anybody to take advantage of. Now, what do we need in education? We need to drive innovation, right? Leveraging ICT, partnering with the great organizations that are providing vocational support, supporting NGOs that have proven they know what to do when it comes to youth unemployment, and really leaving the private sector and the NGO community to do its work, and the government create an enabling environment. And this is urgent, because our young people are leaving this country in droves, and the best and the brightest are being recruited from Canada to Germany to South Africa. ICT has shown that you can be anywhere and do work, and our best minds are leaving the country. And the third sense of urgency is around gender. And I have to talk about women, because I believe we've regressed as a nation in the last few years when it comes to gender equity in Nigeria. With all due respect to everybody who's working on this, if we continue to neglect 50% of our population, we are leaving behind our biggest asset.
Biggest asset.
Our women.
And today, she's talking about the power of agriculture, the dynamics of youth, and food is medicine. We thank you. Honorable Minister, your intervention and your opening comment.
Thank you very much, Eugenia. I was just really gearing up to hear what she says about gender, and you stopped her. I'm looking forward to that as well. I want to start from the point that Ndidi made on government creating enabling environments, because indeed that is the role of government. And President Muhammad Buhari has been one president that has stood out for agriculture, recognizing that you need agriculture and food security to be able to have a secure nation, because nobody can develop with a population as large as Nigeria that are not being fed. And some progress has been made in agriculture. It could be better, and there's opportunity to do more. And all the states, in one way or the other, have keyed into the required measures that they need to take to develop one aspect of agriculture or the other in their states. And that's very important, because it is the agricultural sector that will create the jobs that we need to create to be able to provide jobs for our youth. It is the agricultural sector that we now need to concentrate on and provide opportunities for the youth to innovate on how we can produce better and increase our productivity and increase the yield per hectare. Because it cannot be the same old way in which we used to undertake agriculture that will bring about the desired development. So what have we done in terms of improving the business environment as a government for agriculture as well as for other businesses? Because time is limited, and also I'd like to speak about some specific things that we have done in the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Government. And for me, one key thing is the innovation that we have brought about in the finance bills. We have so far passed finance bills 2019 and 2020 that supports the national budget and also supports the major economic development of our country through those instruments of finance bills. We provide incentives for micro, small, medium enterprises in terms of complete tax exemptions. So there is a category that we actually provided zero tax rates for them. These are small businesses that used to pay tax rates of 30%. And then for the middle category, we reduced their tax rates to 20% from 30%. This is something we did before the breakout of the COVID-19. And when this COVID-19 pandemic happened on the world, those are the same fiscal measures that other countries were undertaking. So a lot of these things are not being talked about, or even in fact the opportunity that it has provided by the passage of these finance bills are not being recognized. It's very important for us to ensure that micro, small, medium enterprises harness their resources and they're supported to grow. And seeing as we were limited in terms of fiscal space, we're not like the US that had very large fiscal plans and incentives. His Excellency Vice President spoke eloquently about the economic sustainability plan. So we knew we were limited in being able to provide resources. We did some. So we thought, why not allow companies to retain the revenues that they will have otherwise paid government? In addition to that, we created the Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme that allows businesses to, so this is speaking to the point that Professor Dwayne Salami has made, to allow businesses to use their own resources to build out capital projects, and in this case, specifically roads. So this is a scheme that we have designed under Executive Order number 007 that allows private sector participants to use their monies to build roads and then recover their investments over a period of time using tax credit. We use the finance bills to be able to eliminate double taxation. We used it to increase the VAT rate. We also used the finance bills to introduce excise duties in the telecom sector, to introduce the electronic money transfer, which we initially called stamp duties, but later changed it. We used it to introduce the automation of tax administration processes, especially in the collection of VAT. All of these things were driven by the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative that we put in place in 2019, and we kept ticking the box. The result today is that as at August 2021, our non-revenues is performed at 116%. That is way over and above the target that we set. But we know that there's still a lot to do, specifically more that we need to do in terms of enhancing the export potentials in the non-oil sector, and that is an area that we have to give a lot of attention to because we need alternative foreign exchange sources to the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. Even though the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act, has improved fiscal regime and we expect some incremental investments in the sector, but our desire is actually to earn foreign exchange through other sources other than oil and gas.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The Minister has itemized some of the support projects that have been done by the government, but she has ended up by saying that there is need to enhance export potential with the non-oil sector, and this is an area we shall be looking at as the panel progresses. Your Excellency, Hail Mariam, please give your 2 minutes opening comment. We know you've already delivered the keynote, but I'm sure there are areas where you wish to have touched. Could you enlighten us in those areas?
Thank you very much, Eugene. First of all, I think I'm trying to express myself frankly because I have a stake in Nigeria as an African. And with that mindset, I will try to speak some of the issues which are very pertinent. The first thing is, I think we are talking now about growth and how to prioritize growth. We are talking not growth in general, but a shared inclusive growth. So if that's the case, then we need to focus on areas where we can, do better. In Ethiopia, we have a say, so you have to ground your leg, in order to walk forward. And one of your leg is going to be on the air, but the other one should ground very well on the ground. So if you just try to float, then you might fall down. Or if you just stand by your 2 legs, there is no forward movement. So you have to start with your first leg grounded and then raise the other one to walk. And now we are trying to fly without grounding our leg properly. Where does we need to ground? We need to ground on our comparative advantage. Nigeria has a comparative advantage very well. It is in the rural and agriculture. You have to ground first there and then talk about industrialization, manufacturing, and all those kinds of things. So, as the governor said, I got a chance to be part of the summit, which the president has organized early on at the beginning of the second term. And I delivered the same speech, almost the same speech. And in order to prepare for that speech, I tried to look into facts and figures of Nigeria. The facts and figures speak themselves. Look into the poverty reduction in Nigeria. In 1990, Nigeria poverty rate was 43%. Today, I also seen the Nigerian Statistical Agency produced a report that Nigerian poverty rate 41%. After 30 years, Nigeria is still in 41 and 43. This fact you can't skip. You have to admit and look into what went wrong all those 30 years. I mean, I'm not talking about one administration. I'm talking about a country. So there should be a continuity of policy and national consensus on the facts and figures where Nigeria is in. To me, in between, I have seen figures that in 2000, the poverty rate of Nigeria was 69%. You can imagine, it was growing from 1990 to 2000. And again, in 2010, it was 53%. So still it's declining, but at a very low rate. So we see there is a decline in poverty reduction in Nigeria, but it's not enough. Because most African countries at this time are below 20% in poverty rate compared with Nigeria. So I think the major poverty in Nigeria is residing in rural areas and urban poor. If you don't focus your policy properly, the policy choice is very, very essential. This I speak as an African, as a Nigerian. Because if you don't really see your own comparative advantage, you are going to lose. Look, who is going, as a private sector, who is going to invest in Nigeria rural areas? I don't think none of you in this hall, as a private sector, are going to invest in Nigerian rural areas. Because it's not profitable. You are not working for charity. You are working for profits. Private sector can do in some areas, but in some areas they are not capable or they are not interested in. So who is going to fill that gap? It's the state. The state cannot abduct from this engagement in economic development. So I think every one of us should play our role in order to bring growth, and inclusive growth, and a shared growth. So to me, I think there should be a national consensus. This is one of the forums to create national consensus in Nigeria. And I think as an outsider, I see that there is a need to diagnose properly and engage and invest in rural Nigeria and in agriculture and in small and medium enterprises, and move forward by engaging the next step, because our leg, which is on the air, is going to touch ground later on.
Shared inclusive growth. His Excellency, the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who is now officially a Nigerian citizen, has spoken. He has told us how important it is to watch the architecture of working the dynamics of putting one step before the other, before flying. And shared inclusive growth is one of the things he talked about, and investing in the rural area and in agriculture. It's time for us to take a look at that call to action, to galvanize, to secure Nigeria's future, to push for sustained economic growth. It would be good for us to hear from the Honorable Minister at this time, for her to talk us through government solution to Nigeria's challenging economic trends, and of course the 2021 to 2025 national plan for how Nigeria can move forward, one step in front and the second leg behind. Honorable Minister.
Fully grounded.
Well said.
Very well said, sir. And advice well taken. I was hoping that this whole of this summit will be, in addition to, because we always talk about our challenges, but also as we talk about the challenges, we should also be profiling the solutions.
Absolutely.
Because government is a collective. It's not just the executive or the legislature or the judiciary. It's also the people of Nigeria that is the government. What we have done in developing the medium-term national development plan is just for me to say that this is one plan that has been truly inclusive. We have made sure we have brought in as many shades of Nigerians as possible into the preparation process. So you have the federal government and its agencies, the states, represented in every working group, the private sector, women, youths, even political parties were brought in, professional organizations. And so the government was providing us a supporter to the process and just harnessing information, agreeing what the priorities are, and then putting the draft of the plan. We have exposed that plan to several stakeholders and received inputs. This plan is a medium-term plan, but there is a longer-term plan, Nigeria Agenda 2050, that is going to be kicked off also the moment this one is launched, we hope in the next couple of weeks. The medium-term development plan has been also mentioned by His Excellency, the Vice President, when he was delivering the President's speech. The objective for us is to make sure that we have policies that are coherent and that whatever we do, whether it's our budget or any other plan, is actually tied to this national development plan. And this is not a plan for the federal government, it's a plan for Nigeria. We also made sure that we had very realistic macroeconomic framework that was the pillars, that was the foundation for the plan. We made sure that this plan had a robust monitoring and evaluation and implementation mechanism, which is unique in terms of compared to other plans that have happened in the past. We costed the plan, identifying the resource gaps, and also provide solutions as to who is to fund what. So federal government, state governments, the private sector, we have made those kind of details on a sector-by-sector basis. The plan is guided by 5 major strategic objectives, which is to establish a strong foundation for a truly diversified economy. So, the Nigerian economy is diversified in the sense that the oil and gas sector today contributes about 7.4% of the GDP. But this diversification has to be deepened. It has to also be truly inclusive. And the next objective is investing in critical physical, financial, digital, science and technology, and innovation infrastructure, because that is important. We are in the stage in the world now where you have to invest in digital technology, in innovation. If not, you will truly be left behind. We also have focus on building a solid framework that enhance capacities to strengthen security and ensure good governance, as well as enable, the fifth objective is to enable a vibrant, educated, and healthy population. Mr. President and this administration have been putting a lot of stock in investing in human capital development, because the assessment of our Human Capital Development Index continues to be poor. The states are doing a lot already. We've seen states that have the largest share of their budgets, some for education, some for health. There's still more that we need to do. And just for me to flag that when you look at the federal government and you say education is only 5% of the budget. That's not the investment that Nigeria is making. The investment that Nigeria is making is the investment by the federal government as well as by all the states. So all of that has to be aggregated, whether it is in health or education. So we should not be looking at these things only with a narrow lens. It's when we look at things more holistically that we have a chance of seeing really where are the gaps that we need to continue to fill. So this plan is also planned around 6 thematic areas: economic growth and development, infrastructure, of course, public administration, as well as human capital development and social development. Under these thematic areas, we also dealt with strategies that are dealing with all aspects of the Nigerian economy, from agriculture and food security to integrated rural development, covering also manufacturing, but also not ignoring the oil and gas sector because there's still potential there, and the improvement in the business environment, the inclusiveness, making sure that women and gender equity was a cross-cutting issue in every sector that we look at. We look at poverty alleviation, governance, defense security, and also the empowerment of our youth. That every sector that we looked at, we're looking at how does this affect the youth? How does this affect the women? Because without looking at how policy affects youth and women, then truly we will not be able to do justice to the growth that we desire to have.
Mrs. Nwuneli, and I'd like to prepare Professor Orama that we're coming to him after Mrs. Nwuneli discusses public-private partnership as part of what you heard from His Excellency, the Governor of Kebbi State, about how private sector and the public sector need to do more in terms of harnessing their resources, their ideas, and pushing forward to improve and grow Nigeria's economy. After, of course, your comment, I'll be going to Professor Orama. So let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. So my name means patience, Ndidi, but I'm a very impatient person. And that's why this theme, the urgency of now, I don't think our panel really understands what's going on out there. That's what I'm sensing. I'm sorry. I feel, when I think about our country, it makes me very emotional because we have no business being in the situation we're in. And the private sector, a lot of the people sitting in this room are building formidable businesses that are struggling for survival because the public sector continues to see the private sector as a threat. I can tell you that the businesses my husband and I have started have not lost anybody to Canada. Why? Because we're providing jobs, health insurance, in the factory, a warm meal. People can provide for their children. You give them hope and a future. So if private sector is given an enabling environment to thrive, consistent policies, not flip-flopping between ministries, changing policies every day, a stable macro and microeconomic environment, stable currency that's strong, security, we will thrive. Then you don't need to borrow $1 trillion because the private sector can deliver. So I'm sorry for sounding emotional, but I don't want us to waste our time. All of us are very busy people. We didn't come here to waste our time. So I'm sorry with all due respect. I'm a proud Nigerian, but we can do it. We have the best brains in the world. And every single year we come here and I look at the private sector and I say, these people could deliver an excellent nation. We know what it takes. So what does private-public partnership mean? That's what NESG was established to do. We need private sector to influence policy, and we need the public sector to hear demand-driven policy making. That's data-driven. Our research institutions, in agriculture, we have over 30 research institutions. None of them ask the private sector, what do you need? How can we reduce post-harvest losses? How can we process? Ensuring that we filter this information and we track and measure impacts is critical. And I know that there are people who are working, and I'm not saying all public sector officials are not. We know there are people who are working, but we need cohesive policy making, streamlined, data-driven, consistent, with measurable outcomes. So you come here and tell us every year what you have done with the recommendations we have provided and how we're moving our country forward. That's what it takes.
Dr. Salami, you have been involved quite eloquently as chairperson, Presidential Economic Advisory Council, and you're on the team for the National Poverty Reduction and Growth Strategy. Therefore, I'd like to come to you to talk to us about institutional reforms, which is part of that growth strategy. Are we looking at public sector institutional reforms, or we are looking at public-private sector institutional reforms? And tell us now and here on this panel whether the public sector is in a different world, the private sector is in a different world, and some of them have committed some sin and the other have not. Is that, because I heard you at the beginning say government can't do everything. So I'd like you to weigh in here at this time.
Well, I'm very clear in my head about the need for a clarity on, you see, in my view, and I spent a lot of my time in the private sector, as Ndidi has said, the private sector does have the capacity. And as I said earlier, the private sector does have the resources. It's not necessarily all domestic. Look, there's about $17 trillion of international capital invested in negative yield assets. And if Nigeria today were to secure a regular inflow of, say, $40–50 billion of FDI, and Nigeria does have the absorptive capacity to be able to take that on. And the key question then becomes, why not? And again, Ndidi has raised, very pertinently the question, and also the honorable keynote speaker said something earlier, and I hope we didn't miss it, that who would invest in Nigeria today if you're looking to make profits? And in my view, therein lies the key challenge. How do we build that understanding? You see, it's not about, it's a public sector, it's a private sector. It's about Nigeria. That's first and foremost. Secondly, it's got to be understood that there are certain things the private sector will not do. There are certain things, and therefore the government should do. But there are certain things the government is doing that perhaps, in my view, the private sector can be incentivized to do. And so, for me, we need to be very careful. His Excellency, the Governor of Kebbi, is absolutely right. There is a quantum challenge, a quantum of resources that's available. But my view remains that we need to be careful how we borrow. That countries borrow. If you look at what has happened post-pandemic, global borrowing has risen tremendously. But then, for different countries, because when people say, Nigeria should borrow more, let me state it very clearly. I have no challenge in understanding the imperative of borrowing, but I do have a challenge, is that we shouldn't be comparing, we should compare like with like. Nigeria, you're looking at total resource basket, as His Excellency has said, about $70–80 billion. When you look at our revenue to GDP ratio as a country, it's about 7–8%. When you look at some of the countries against which we compare ourselves and say these are heavy borrowers, therefore we should emulate them, their revenue to GDP ratios in some cases are as high as 30%. When you look at some of these countries, their debt service cost to their revenues, when you look, for example, at an Italy, 210% of its GDP is its indebtedness, but the cost is about 7% on an annualized basis. So these are some of the issues. But coming back to the issue, for me, I don't think Nigeria's real challenge, truthfully, is whether we can find the resources. It honestly is, in my view, whether we can persuade the resources that Nigeria is where it ought to come. Look, at the moment, where we are at is indeed private sector resources seeking to live. We've been talking about Nigerians emigrating, but indeed, Nigerian capital is lining up at every opportunity to live. And the question's got to be, how do we keep it here? How do we make it sustain and grow? The Honorable Minister of Finance made, I think, a very excellent point in her description of the budget, of the national plan. See, at the heart of it, rapid, inclusive, sustained, sustainable growth. His Excellency, our keynote speaker, drew attention to the number of consecutive years in which the Ethiopian economy grew at very high rates. If you don't get to that, then taking people out of poverty becomes sporadic. So for me, it's not, we certainly need to build this whole stakeholder approach, number one. Secondly, we need an elite consensus about where Nigeria ought to be and how she needs to get there.
How she needs to get there.
It's
I'd like
important.
to stop you there because I'd like the Honorable Minister of Finance to have the floor because several issues have been raised, and I would like you to make comments about the comment that has come from His Excellency and the comment that has come from Mrs. Wuneli in terms of should we borrow, in terms of how big our budget should be, and in terms of whether private sector and public sector consider themselves competitors rather than collaborators.
But let me start from what Mr. Onuli said. I can feel the frustration and the urgency and the need to run. But also, His Excellency said, your feet must be well grounded. Otherwise, if you attempt to fly, you will actually fall. And a lot of us in government have those same frustrations. We deal with them on a daily basis. So I want to ask everybody to really slow down and be patient. Just let's look at our reality and address one issue at a time and get it right before we move to them. We can't do everything. Government is not an expert in everything. Government doesn't have unlimited resources. Government, in fact, has very, very limited resources at this time. And that's why we're reaching out to the private sector. What do you think? What should we do? How do we raise the resources? That's why the InfraCo was set up, that is made up of government as well as investments in the private sector. The PID, the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund, has government funds from development partners, and also trying to attract private sector funds. So we can't do everything in one year or even one administration. We just need to do a plan and actually stay faithful to the plan. If we're consistent in implementing our plans and we put in place, like we've done now, a presidential implementation unit for the implementation of the next development plan, so that there are people who are dedicated to just tracking the performance of the plan, flagging where challenges are, and making sure that whatever issues need to be addressed are actually mitigated on time. The PEPEC was a useful exercise, and it was largely a private sector body. So is the Presidential Competitive Council. It's also largely a private sector. So we're actually trying to do those reach outs, and we do get a lot of inputs. We're preparing the Finance Act 2021. We've had businesses from all sectors bringing input, sitting with us, saying, we want you to make this policy or change that policy. And we're listening and tracking and prioritizing what can go in this year, because you can't do everything at the same time. So we need people to give us those inputs and engage us, as opposed to just challenging without providing the solutions or complaining without providing alternatives. On borrowing, Nigeria, like most countries in the world, had to borrow more than it planned because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are very uncomfortable with the fact that we had to borrow at those quantum exceeding the threshold that is pegged by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But we've made sure that we have planned over the next 3 years that the borrowing is scaled down, and also that we're able to borrow at levels that we can actually repay the debt service obligation. So our borrowing is not just being done blindly. It's guided by laws. It's guided by a medium-term debt plan. We have a board that for the debt management office that is chaired by His Excellency the Vice President. So we actually plan these things and we track them. I feel the discomfort from the polity that we're borrowing too much. We're going to leave debts that the future generation has taken. But I think if the conversation can move towards what are they doing with the monies that they are borrowing. We do need to build this major infrastructure now for us to have a chance to attain the minimum 7% growth that His Excellency has said. And by the way, that is the growth that we have for the medium term 2025 is to attain that 7% growth rate. So these things are being done planned. They're not being done blindly. And these investments will vindicate us in the future.
The monies are not randomly borrowed. You heard it from the Honorable Minister of Finance, and she has asked that we engage more and try to find out what is going on. Basically, that's the question, that's the comment that you have made, that we engage more and find out what the money is for. And so that's a challenge to Nigerians, and for us to engage more with your office and with your various departments. We shall be returning to the panelists, but I'd like to quickly go to Professor Orama, who is waiting at the other end virtually. Professor Orama, you have been for the longest a force to be reckoned with in international trade and finance. How is trade a veritable asset for Nigeria's economic growth? And how is the Afrexim Bank working towards assuring that this is useful and used functionally within the Nigerian economic sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, everything we are talking about today, about the ability to borrow and the economic situation we find ourselves in, has a lot to do with the growth, the economic growth. And that also has a lot to do with the element, what we need to do to make sure that we create a big cake that will even enable us to borrow if we want to borrow, because you cannot borrow beyond your income, and it's the GDP that decides it. Trade, of course, we all know that trade opens a country to global competition, opens the country to markets beyond its own, brings innovation, and all those other things that dynamizes an economy. But I would like to come out to the specific issues of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, because this agreement has been entered into by 54 African countries, essentially because they recognize that it provides a pathway for Africa to achieve the kind of growth we need, the high quality growth we need. If you look at the way the world is today, the global relations of trade, Africa produces largely commodities. At a time that commodities as a share of global trade is shrinking, manufacturing as a share of global trade is about 85%, and we are 15%. Now, if you look at the way our trade is organized, you understand why we are in difficulties, why we will remain in perpetuity if we don't change it, in deficits. If we export, say, oil, and to export a barrel of oil, you pay shipping, you pay insurance. Maybe some of them are retained, but most of them you pay them out. The oil is taken to maybe Singapore to be refined. When the oil is refined in Singapore, there is a refining margin that is added. You pay another shipping and it comes back to you. Do you ever think you will be in surplus? You will never be. The only reason we do not see it all the time is because the revenue from the sale of oil, the royalties and all that, come to the government. Whereas the people who pay initially for the imports, the fuel we use, those who use it for maybe the energy and all that, they are paid individually. But where do they all end up to? They end up at the tables of Mr. Mefiele at the central bank for foreign exchange to be bought, to pay out. And that's when we begin to see the deficits. And that happens with cocoa, that happens with coffee. So that is why the AFCFTA is very, very important for us to use it to begin to move up the value chain. And Nigeria has a tremendous opportunity to leverage this. Nigeria has the economic size to take full advantage of that agreement. Nigeria, no matter what we say, from a manufacturing value added, Nigeria is among the top 5 countries on the continent, reflecting what the Honorable Minister mentioned about the diversification of the economy. And of course, Nigeria is an oil-producing country with all the resources, including even agriculture we talk about today. And Nigeria has good initial conditions. We have institutions. They may not be working very well, but they are there, and we just need to make them to work. We have Nigerian Export-Import Bank, an export credit agency that can be used to support moving to other African markets. But we need to make it possible for it to support the businesses. We have the Export Promotion Council. Some countries don't have all of this. We actually have the banks, and our banks are regional. Usually, banks follow businesses. But in the Nigerian case, the banks are leading the way, so the businesses can follow them. And above all, we have very strong entrepreneurs. Be it the SMEs. If you go to any market in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Cote d'Ivoire, you are likely to see Nigerians running shops there. You are likely to see Nigerian products there being brought by informal traders. These are reflections of strong entrepreneurship. And of course, the capacities we have through people we train every day and the population we have.
So I would go first to His Excellency for his 30 seconds closing comment. And yesterday when we were having a conversation, we talked about how can we get youth to be interested in agriculture. We may have missed that in the conversation, but I'd like you to take your pick of what you'd like to close with very quickly. 30 seconds, each panelist.
I think, first of all, the things which I have talked are not dealing with the good governance and also the conflict issues in the respective countries. I have dealt only with the economic performance that has been in Ethiopia. But like in Nigeria, we in Ethiopia has also huge challenge in terms of ethnic polarization and, as a federal state, also tensions within, conflict within specific federal states. Now, the war in Tigray, for example, which has been mentioned, has its own genesis, which is not directly related to what is going on in the country. When the federal government, the federal structure of the country was delineated, it was delineated according to the ethnic boundaries of certain ethnic groups. And that was initially seen to be a good move forward, but through course, there was a fight on the borders of each, federal state, that this area and this ethnic group belongs to me, and kind of things.
So
happen.
management of ethnicities is very critical in part of what
Exactly.
Ethiopia did. I want to thank you, Your Excellency. I can't take any more comments from you. I'll go to the Honorable Minister of Finance to make a quick 30 seconds comment, and then I'll come to Mrs. Nwuneli.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. To Umi's question, that's a very tough one. One thing. Well, I should say we should invest in agriculture that will be driven by innovation and technology with the sole focus of creating jobs for the youth.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Mrs. Nwuneli, quickly, please, 30 seconds.
I'll just end with my favorite proverb, which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And I've modified it to say, if you want to go fast and far, which is what we need now, we need to go with integrity, humility, leaving our egos and our logos behind, and working collaboratively to deliver for our people, because it's about legacy. The future generations will hold us accountable for what we choose to do or not do to transform this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Salami, human capital flight.
Well, I think with respect to human capital flight, we ought to now understand that the interests of the millennial generation must now be predominant at the top of our thinking. The way they see things is not the way we necessarily see things. And so to that extent, we need to understand. I was saying to someone yesterday, when I speak to my father, I'm going to be 60, my father is 94. I stand before him, shall we say a little anxious. When my son speaks to me, I was talking to him the other day, oh, you missed out on X, Y, and Z. He says, oh, well, happens. And I thought, on my money, it don't happen. So it's essentially about understanding what drives them, and these must be at the heart of our thinking.
Inclusive growth. And let's go to you, Your Excellency, to close with 30 seconds. I would apologize to Professor Orama. We would not be able to go to him, but we would like to thank him for joining us. Your Excellency, 30 seconds, 2 sentences.
Once more, to thank NESG. In the last 6 years, we have seen a lot of initiatives, and they are working. In my state, I've seen transformations taking place by very, very innovative programs, both from the public and private sector. And I believe we need much more of that.
Thank you very much. Professor Orama, let's just see you so we acknowledge that you were with us throughout and we're grateful. Just a comment from you to say thank you for the opportunity we've had with you. Please go ahead. 1 sentence. Thank you, Professor Orama.
That sentence is that the Nigerian status has set is his people, and the platform that would turn it out, get it out of poverty is the AFCFTA.
I want to thank all the panelists in this first session. My name is Eugenia Abu. It has been a pleasure to serve.
Thank you for listening to our content today. Remember to subscribe to the NESG Radio. Follow us across all social media channels and visit our website www.nesgru.org/NESG Radio. NESG, in the national interest.